excited because this morning we've got my friend Dr. Michael Lloyd, who is over here from Oxford University. His area over there in terms of job is he is the principal, which means the head of Wycliffe Hall, which is one of the Oxford University colleges. It's an Anglican evangelical college, and he has a specialty there beyond simply being an administrator. He is their specialist in all things evil and suffering, not in terms of doing it, but in terms generally. But he came over here because he thought we were good research subjects, and he... Yeah. Your mic's not on either. No, let's turn it on. I got to find your mic pack. Is this where you got it? Hit on right there in the top. Now they can hear your sarcastic, witty British comments.
Acerbic remarks.
Yes. So he has been in our class before. He doesn't need a great introduction. Many of you may have been at his lecture at the library last night, or the board panel discussion we had Friday. The unique part about
That's
class...
board with an A, I'm hoping.
Yes, it was board with an A, not B-O-R-E-D. We weren't drilling holes either. And yet we are here today with a chance to talk about these subjects of evil, but I'm really excited because now I get to weigh in. And this weekend I've been on the listening end with many of you, asking a few questions here and there. But this will be a dialogue where both of us are expressing some views. He may be challenging me with some questions. I may be challenging him with some questions. But the way I think we should best start out is, and I'll be seated for most of this, but I've got the Elmo working, or the IPVO working. Sorry, people at IPVO. And I'm going to ask Mike, if he would, to give us, just so we can look at him, I'll make the notes while he's talking, the three historically most prominent views from a Christian philosophical perspective about suffering. So would you give us those three views so that we have them in our brain as we try to parse through these issues and see which may or may not make sense to us?
Yeah, well, there's basically three families of response to the problem of evil within Christian theology. There are lots of different variations on those things. It's like different variants of a virus.
We know that.
And the first is to see suffering as being instrumental to the purposes of God, that God allows them because he uses them to bring good out of something, whether it's to build character or whether it's to make us deeper in terms of compassion and qualities like compassion and courage. You can't have compassion unless you've got some suffering to be compassionate about. You can't show courage unless there's threat. So for all sorts of good reasons, God is using suffering as his instrument to bring about some good that wouldn't otherwise be possible. That's the first family of views, set of views on the problem of evil. The second is to see suffering as inevitable within the purposes of God. God doesn't like suffering, he doesn't want it, he doesn't deliberately build it in, but if you're going to have a physical world, say these people, you're going to have clashes. There's just inevitably going to be clashes between the different elements of a complex physical system. And that's unfortunate, that is tragic, but it's absolutely unavoidable. And if God wants to have a physical world, that's going to happen within his creation. So that's the second family of responses. And the third is to see suffering as being inimical to the purposes of God, that it has no place within the purposes of God, that God hates it, he's against it, he's working against it. I was trying to show last night that whenever you see Jesus and suffering together, he's attacking it. And I was suggesting that Jesus has an inimical view of suffering as being inimical to the purposes of God, and that's why there's this divine assault upon suffering within the ministry of Jesus. Is that
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, we had more questions last night than I remotely had time to ask Mike. And
But
so I've
most of them were, why did you invite that man?
No, those were the ones directed to me. The ones directed to you were also plentiful. And no, everybody was so excited and so stoked about it. So one of the passages that you spoke of last night is the passage of the blind man and the man that was born blind.
Yep.
And the question arose, who was it that sinned? This man or someone else? I don't suppose you remember where that passage is
It's
found.
John 9.
John 9.
First 3 verses of John 9.
Okay, I was thinking it was John 8.
Just to set the context, I looked at 48 passages in the scriptures, all of which seem to me to support the suffering as inimical to the purposes of God position. And there were 2 that might be read the other way, and this is one of them.
Okay, so we've got the passage up here. The passage says, as Jesus passed by, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Then having said these things, he spits on the ground. My favorite Greek verb to spit is patuo. Patuo, I spit. Patuo. Sounds like a comic strip. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva, and he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. He went and washed, and he came back seeing. That's the passage.
It is.
And you say that this is one passage where some people might have an argument that point number 1, family of response number 1, suffering is God's instrument. He allows it to demonstrate his purposes, but you don't read it that way.
No, I think that's problematic, not only because it's, an outlier in all the examples of Jesus in the presence of suffering, where he simply displays hostility towards suffering and undoes it. Partly because I think it's morally tricky to inflict suffering on somebody for your own self-glorification. It doesn't sound like the God that we know. After all, the real glory of God is to be found in the cross. That's where God doesn't inflict suffering on others for his own glory. He suffers himself for their sake. That's where glory is seen. And thirdly, there is a different possible way of interpreting it or of translating it, which is to see the so that clause not as being purposive, but as being imperative. In other words, to say, neither this man sinned nor his parents, but let the works of God be seen in him. And that is a construction that you find in other places in the Gospels. I'm not enough of an expert on Greek or linguistics to know how well-grounded that is. I tried it out with N.T. Wright, and he didn't throw up his hands in horror.
Well, and he's a much better Greek scholar than I would ever be. I don't hold myself out. I know enough Greek to know I'm not a Greek scholar. But the key to this in the Greek is this but that. In the Greek, let's get to a different sheet. We'll come back to this one. In the Greek, it is this word hina. It's got an H sound to it, so that's the rough breathing.
Can't see it.
Oh, can't see it. It is this word hina. Let me rewrite it again. You've got an iota with a rough sound, an H sound at the start, and then a nu or an N sound, and then an A or alpha. And so hina is often built in what's in Greek called a hina purpose clause. And it is a hina purpose clause, and it means it's for the purpose of. C-L-A-U-S-E. But hina is not always a purpose clause. Sometimes it just means that. And to me, it's the difference between what in English we call causation and association. Okay? Think about that for a moment. Causation and association. Now, those of you who are with me, I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call. That's just Joe Biden. I don't have time for that.
Somebody complaining about your Greek. Probably.
Yeah. That's NT Wright. What does he know? Guy just barely keeps his job at Wycliffe. And so those who follow this class or follow me much know that I spent a number of months at the end of last year trying a case dealing with the opioid crisis up in Ohio. And one of the witnesses that I had in that case was an epidemiologist. Now, epidemiologists are specialists at assessing group problems and the cause of those problems. And one of the biggest issues for epidemiologists is whether something is causing something or merely associated with it. So, for example, there are a host of studies that indicate if you drink diet soda, you die earlier. And those studies get paraded out to me every time I get a Diet Dr. Pepper. But when you look at those studies, the question becomes, is it the diet soda that's causing the early death? Or, in other words, is there causation? Or is it merely associated? And by that, people who drink diet soda tend to be overweight, tend to be unhealthy in other ways, tend to be diabetic, tend to be fill in the blank, and those other things might be causing it, and the diet soda might just be associated with it, not a cause. Make sense? So anytime in a trial I'm trying to show that something caused something else through this kind of testimony, there are certain criteria that we have to prove up at trial. Those criteria were formed by a British epidemiologist named Sir Bradford Hill in the 1950s. They were used in the 1960s to finally establish that smoking causes lung cancer. Before that, the argument had always been it's merely associated with lung cancer. It doesn't cause it. But these are the criteria that were used. And I brought my PowerPoint this morning because I have the actual slide that I used with the witness at trial. And this is it, to walk through these different criteria. But if you look for a moment, when you're deciding if something causes something else through epidemiology, through group studies, you have to look at the strength of the group. Do you have a large enough group to be able to tell? Do you have a consistent read across this? Is it reproducible? Can you do it again and again and again? Is it specific? Is it right in time? You know, if it's a cause, it needs to precede the result. Is there a dose-response relationship? The more you do of it, do you have more of it? Is it biologically plausible? Does it make sense? Is it coherent? Can you experiment with it? And are there other analogies? Now, not all of those fit, and that's why they're called criteria and not requirements. But I think much the same can be done with Scripture. We can make decisions about how to interpret that hina clause based upon some of these factors, which include how does it weigh against the rest of Scripture? And that's what you're doing. You're saying I've got 40, how many passages?
48, but that's only counting them once in each. Where they're in different Gospels, I've only counted them once.
In other words, if Matthew, Mark, and Luke all give the same story, you only count it once,
I
not
only count
three.
it once, yeah.
So a minimum of 48. perhaps as many as 100 plus.
And some of those are group things. So group accounts of multiple people coming to Jesus to be healed or cured or exorcised or whatever it may be.
And there are two that you find need to get a greater focus to distinguish them or to invalidate your perspective. And so when you look at this and you make that decision about what this means, one very proper thing to do is to weigh it against the other scriptures to see what the others say. And I would suggest to you that the alternative read of this, if you take that hina clause, not as a purpose, but simply as an association, you've got it meaning the following. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? Jesus says, neither one. But the works of God are going to be displayed in him. It's not that he was born blind to cause this. That the cause of his being born blind is so the works of God would be displayed, but an association of him being born blind is that the works of God will be displayed in him. Does that make any sense? Is that a fair reading of what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it's very fair. And then it's consistency with the other passages, but consistency with what we know about God throughout the whole of the scriptural witness.
Okay, and explain to us, why is this important? Those of you who don't remember Mike's background, he not only is an academician of the highest degree, but he is also a pastor with a pastor's heart, and actually was called into the pastorate when he got propelled into academia, because they said basically you can prepare others for the pastorate and infuse the church with academic vigor. And there are fewer people who can do that, so please go that direction, and he did. But he still maintains that pastor's heart as he trains pastors and preaches and has worked as a chaplain and all the rest. So why is this important to you?
I think one of the real problems, your theology is not going to protect you from the pain of things that happen, but it can make things worse. Pain is pain, suffering is suffering. You know, just because you have a particular belief system, it's not going to stop that from being painful. Let's not have undue expectations. But it can make things worse. And one of the main ways in which I think our theology can make things worse is by suggesting that God is doing it. God's behind it. It's his idea. It's of him. It's from him. He wants it. And that seems to me to make God people's enemy. If somebody has, lost a child, that is the most horrible and horrendous thing. To suggest that God wanted it, and to suggest that he wanted it so that he might be glorified in some way, seems to me, A, to make people the enemy pastorally, and B, to make his goodness more difficult to believe in.
Yeah, the integrity and character of our God is at stake.
Yes.
Fair?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got two Mark Lanierisms that I want to throw out here and see what you think of them.
Yeah, let's throw them out here.
That was dastardly. Talking about the character of God and how the character of God is at stake.
This is a bit like Daniel, isn't it? The writing on the wall.
And look, the hand just appears.
Yeah.
The character of God. One, I would suggest God is an efficiency king. And by that I mean that he doesn't let anything go unwasted. He milks it for all he can get for the good.
Doesn't let anything go wasted, I think you mean.
Wasted, what did I say?
You said unwasted.
I was wrong. Doesn't let anything...
I said we'd throw it out.
Doesn't let anything go wasted.
Yeah.
And that includes suffering.
Yes.
So here's my passage that I go to for that. And then I want to throw it out there, and I want you to comment on it. I am in Psalm 84, one of my absolute, sorry, Janet Seifert, favorite Psalms. Janet makes fun of me because every passage I put up, I always say, this is one of my favorite. And that's because I don't go to the ones I hate. Here's the section. Blessed are those whose strength is in you. It's talking about Yahweh, God. In whose heart are the highways to Zion. Now we're in metaphor, poetry land. It's not saying that there's a true GPS in the a map in the heart. Clearly we're talking metaphorically. And remember, the Hebrew word lev, heart, is where they thought the seat of the mind was. And so we could translate that mind. In your mind, the way you think are the highways to Zion. And so as they go through the valley of Baca, and geographers will debate what the valley of Baca may have been, or may not have been. Were these basil trees? Were they, what was it that made it the valley of Baca? I go back to the poetic part of this. Baca in Hebrew means tears, means crying. As they go through the valley, and valley in Hebrew is generally a location of depression, not simply geographical depression, but yep. The valley of the shadow of death, the dark valley. The valley is not a mountaintop experience. It can be a low place in life. So as they go through the valley of tears, they make it a place of springs. Yeah. So the tears that we experience in this life when we're walking to the Lord and find Him as our strength, He takes those tears and He turns them into nourishing, life-sustaining springs. Fair?
Absolutely
Efficient
fair.
God.
Yep.
All right, talk to us about that.
No, I entirely agree with that. I think, though I do not believe that God sends suffering in order to bring good, I do think that He brings good out of suffering. And if you want an absolute proof of that, the most, to use your word, dastardly thing that human beings could do is to kill God. That's what happens on the cross. And yet that is the source of life and the renewal of the cosmos. So out of the most evil thing, God has brought something quite astounding and remarkable. So that seems to me to guarantee that God can do that anyway. He can bring good out of evil. I don't believe that's why I don't believe He sends the evil, but He will bring good out of it. And the way I sometimes put that is that, and apologies for those who already heard this twice before, but when God brings good out of suffering, as He does, it's God we have to thank, not the suffering. The suffering itself is just destructive. Left to its own terms, its end, its telos, its effect is going to be destruction. It destroys, it limits, it constrains. But when offered to God, it can become the means of bringing springs for ourselves and for others. It can be the means of deepening us. I'm not in any way denying those effects, but they're the work of God and they're not the work of the suffering.
And this is the Romans 8:28 passage that God works all things together for good for those who love Him and are called to His purposes.
That's exactly part of what's going on. Yeah.
Part of what's going on.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And an important clarification. Okay, on the front row over here we have Dr. Ingrid Farrow standing. I don't have my glasses on, but it looks like you in a fuzzy way. Would you please stand up so everybody can identify you? This is Dr. Ingrid Farrow. She teaches, clap for her. She teaches at Northern Seminary and also at a seminary in Sweden, which is, I think, her homeland. We plan on bringing her back to the library to lecture, so be real nice to her so she'll want to come back sometime in our next lecture period, which will be the 22-23 academic year. But she was on our panel as part of our discussion group on Friday and had a powerful testimony. And she opened my eyes to a passage that if I had read it before, I had totally forgotten that I had read it. And I don't think I took Isaiah in college for Hebrew. I did take minor prophets, so maybe I missed this in Hebrew class, but it had just totally slipped my mind. And this was the passage that she talked about. In Isaiah 61, a passage which Jesus quoted part of multiple times. He kind of alludes to it to give John the Baptist's followers an explanation to give John, but he also references in synagogue teaching, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound." Now, if we just stop there, well, don't stop there. Let's go to verse 2 also. "To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, to the day of the vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn." If we stop there, that's consistent with everything you've been saying. Fair?
Yes.
Okay.
As is the bit coming up, but
yeah, as is the bit coming up. But the bit coming up is what I want to emphasize, because this is really a cool thing you pointed out, Ingrid. To grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress. Now, headdress here, beautiful headdress, it's actually, that's the way they translate the word, is the Hebrew word. Let's get another sheet going. It's the Hebrew word pa'ir, which is a pay sound with a stop after it, and then an aleph if you are keeping your Hebrew up, and then a resh. So that's a pa and a ear kind of sound, for lack of a better way of saying it. They write backwards. But these are your key letters. Got them? These are 3 letters. All right? That is the beautiful headdress. And he grants those a beautiful headdress instead of ashes. So if this is the headdress or the crown, ashes, which is what people heaped on themselves in time of mourning, ashes and dirt. You'd wear sackcloth, and it showed the world how deeply you were mourning. Ashes is the word eper. So it's the same basic letters, but put into a different order. And it's actually efer, because you don't have the dot in the middle there. But it's efer. And so you've got those same 3 letters, just 2 of them are transposed. So he transposes the letters. Hebrew plays these games all the time. Noah was... I won't go through all the examples, but you'll see this all the time, God making these play on words, the Hebrew scriptures making them. So he takes the efer and he makes it the pe'er. And then look what it says. "The oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified." And the word glorified is the hitpael of that others there. And so it is the word, and I'm going to leave the hit out and just put the rest of it. It becomes pa'el. Pa'ar, sorry. Pa'ar. Same letters. So he's got the same, you just have the hit in front of it, if you're following. But you've got the same letters for the same sounds, for the same words, for the same play, to help us understand the way these all go together. That God will take the mourning, he'll take the ashes, he'll fix the letters to make them a beautiful headdress, because as those letters are fixed, God is the one who's truly glorified. Now, that doesn't mean he causes the suffering so he could be glorified.
No.
It's not causation. It's association. Would you like to comment on it, please?
I think that's exactly right. And the kind of moral problem that I was talking about earlier of God inflicting suffering in order to glorify himself, which seems entirely wrong. This way, it's entirely right. It is through that reversal, through undoing the ashes and the mourning and turning it into a glorious headdress, that he is glorified. It is in that he is glorified. That seems to me to fit with the whole healing ministry of Jesus. Where the glory of God is seen is in the putting right of creation, not in the infliction of suffering, but in the undoing of it. That seems to me to fit entirely with what you see in the ministry and person of Jesus.
So, God goes green is the way I say it. God is the ultimate recycler. He is the ultimate at taking the garbage in our life and transforming it into something that's useful and beautiful and of great use to his kingdom and in great use to us.
Can we do a shout out for Ingrid's book? Will that show up?
Ingrid's book, Evil in Genesis, a contextual analysis of Hebrew lexemes for evil in the book of Genesis by Ingrid Farrow. Yeah. And we will bring her back, God willing, and have her speak about such things. And you will be, as Jarrett Stevens said, Pastor Jarrett, after the panel presentation yesterday, she can preach. And he's one of my favorite preachers. So for him to say that's really something. Okay, next. I want to talk to you a little bit about what suffering is. Because I got to tell you, there's a long line. And at one end of the line is, gee, I didn't get what I want for Christmas. You know, why not what I want? Why does everything happen to me when life is actually pretty Jim Dandy? And the other end is, you know, just the despair of death. And not just death, but you know, torture, the Holocaust. I mean, real suffering. The distinction, I don't remember who made it. It may have been you as well, Ingrid, of the difference between saying, man, I'm famished, I haven't eaten, my stomach hurts, I'm having stomach pains, I'm suffering. Yet you know you've got Thanksgiving lunch happening in just a few hours, and you're suffering because you're saving up for it. The difference between that and living in a third world country or somewhere else where you really don't know when or if you'll get to eat again. You know, at what point is it suffering, and at what point is it just, you know, rub some dirt in it and get on going? You know, I'm sure coaches, football players often thought he was causing them suffering. You know,
yeah,
get after it.
It's very difficult to draw the line, but there's clearly a line to be drawn. I mean, it's interesting that Genesis 3 talks about, I will increase your pains. That suggests there was pain before the fall. It suggests that there's actually a degree of pain that is compatible actually with really good living. If I go walking for 20 miles or something, my muscles are painful. But that's not really suffering. In fact, it's part of the pleasure, because you then go home and have a nice long soak in a bath, and you have a good whatever meal at the end of it. And I nearly said drink, but I realized this is a Baptist church, so...
Yeah, but only half the people in here care. The other half are like, yeah.
But there's a point at which it becomes destructive. There's a point at which it's a bit like a spring. If you can pull it, it goes back. If you put it too far, it doesn't go back. It's lost. It's no longer a spring. And it's the same with suffering. A certain amount of pain is fine. You know you're going to get over it. You know it's going to go back to normal. That's not a problem. There's a point beyond which it just strings you out, and it's too much, and you cannot go back. And it limits who you are. It limits what you can do. There's permanent loss. And I think the point of permanent loss is where it turns from that which is perfectly compatible with flourishing and that which simply isn't.
Okay, keep talking. I just thought of something and I have to pull it up on the computer.
Oh, very good. Well, what should I talk about? I'll talk about cricket. No, we've just done really badly, so I won't do that. I think everybody knows. And for different people, it will be the line will be in a different place. So it is quite a personal thing. But there's a point at which the pain does not contribute to the pleasure of the walk and to the recovery from the walk. There's a point at which you can't walk. And that's the point at which you are being hampered, you're being constricted, you are not physically living the fullness of life that God would want for you. And that is the point at which I think it turns from being acceptable pain to distressing and constricting suffering.
Okay, so while you were talking, I made a quick slide. This is a Sudoku puzzle. Has anyone ever done a Sudoku puzzle before? I'm speaking to you.
What, because they know suffering?
No, because they'll understand this illustration. O thou who hast not done a Sudoku puzzle before.
Ever. I haven't, squandered my life in that kind of riotous living, I'm afraid.
I'm reminded of a fellow who went to a buddy who was a judge out in East Texas, and he said, "Judge, we've got a problem. Our preacher has absconded with the building fund." And he said, and the judge said to him, he said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And he said, "Well, you want me to try and get the money back?" And he said, "Oh, no, we know he's already spent the money. He spent it on wine and women, and the rest of it he just wasted." I'm sitting there going, "Do you realize what you just said?" And I was being told that story. It's never left my brain. So yeah, you spent your efforts on things you wasted. So here's a Sudoku puzzle. And the way a Sudoku puzzle works, and Mike, you've got to get this, okay?
Okay.
All of it's based on the numbers 1 through 9.
Yes.
Okay? And in every line going across, you will use each of those numbers only once. But that's also true for every line going down.
Yes.
And that also means that within each box, you've got the numbers 1 through 9. So for example, in this box, you've already got a 1, 4, 5, 6, 8. You're missing the 2 and the 3, the 7 and the 9, and they'll go in these 2 boxes somehow. But the 7 can't go there because in that row going down, you've already got a 7. So the 7's got to go either here or here or here. Well, it can't go here because you've already got a 7. So now you've eliminated and you've got a 7 in one of these 2 boxes. And you do this. And at the end, if you've done this puzzle right, you've got a 1 through 9 on each of the rows going across, on each of the rows going down, and in each of the boxes. And there's only one solution. Now, here's the problem God has, using anthropomorphisms to describe his purposes. The problem God has is he's got a play going on. He's got a world in existence where he's given all of us an ability to make choices. It's like we get to choose which number we're going to be. Do I want to do what God wants me to or not? And yet we know that at the end of the story, God's kingdom and everything worked out exactly like he said it would. So he's got the very difficult position of needing a Sudoku puzzle that works out at the end, where instead of him picking which number is which, he allows us to pick which number we are. And that means because some people are choosing to be something over here and to do something, the net result is other people over here will have to suffer or be less than God would have wanted them to be on their own. Because the puzzle has to work out at the end. If I were pursuing a PhD under this gentleman, this would be the guiding principle behind what I would try to prove scripturally.
No, I'd be the guiding principle.
Well, that's very clever, sort of. And the idea being that God has got to work this out. So now, let's say for the Sudoku puzzle to work out for God's end result, because of what someone else has done, I have to suffer. Then I would suggest to you, to that extent, I am sharing the sufferings of Christ. Because Christ has to suffer in order for any of this puzzle to work out. There's no way the end result works out without Christ, God incarnate, coming and atoning for my sins through death. The whole puzzle's impossible. The end result of God's reestablishment of an eternity with his creation is just not going to happen. It can't. A just God can't reign unjustly. Okay? So all the sufferings of Christ were necessary for the Sudoku puzzle to work out in the end. And that doesn't mean that it is God's purpose for us to suffer. It doesn't mean that he brings that suffering. But it does mean that he works through that suffering for his good purposes. And as a result, we can see that suffering as sharing in the suffering of Christ. And like James says, count it all joy when you meet various trials and suffering. As Paul says, know that when you're following Christ, when you say, hey, I'm on the team, you're walking into a world of suffering for the sake of Christ, for the mission, for the cause. Agree or disagree or want to comment?
My first comment is that the way, I thought you were going to say that the way the Sudoku is like the problem of evil is and suffering is that they both prompt the question, why?
Tom Wright does Sudoku puzzles in his spare time. I'll tell him that's what you said.
But secondly, I think it ties in with what you were saying about God recycling. There is nothing that God cannot turn to good, to our advantage, and to his glory. There's nothing, nowhere we can go that is so cut off from that purpose and his purposes that it cannot be used in some way. That doesn't make it good, it doesn't make it okay, it doesn't mean that he caused it, it doesn't mean that he wanted it, but everything is open, if offered to him, to being used in ways that will undo what you were talking about there, where somebody's actions mean that you have to suffer. It can actually mean the opposite, that you're suffering, and the way you handle it and the way you deal with it and the way you offer it to God can mean that somebody else doesn't have to.
That's a great point. I think one of the illustrations that comes to my mind, I probably love especially because I believe it was an early church father who was a lawyer turned theologian who commented that, and you'll get the quote right, I won't, that the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church, or something to that effect.
Italian.
Yeah, the lawyer, North African lawyer.
Well, indeed, yes.
Anyway, the idea being that people who were martyred for their faith, an ultimate suffering, many of whom did so smiling, with joy and singing and looking unto the heavens, not unlike Stephen, the first martyr in Acts. Those people became the reason the church really took off in growth, as people watched this and thought, this is not ordinary facing of death and martyrdom.
And I do think that the godly living of bearing of innocent suffering does something quite remarkable. In the cross, you see that par excellence, but it's true everywhere else, and that's why, particularly with the martyrs, that godly bearing of innocent suffering just changes things.
So I've got a couple of questions from last night that I didn't have a chance to ask you.
Okay.
I think I've tried, I went through and I read all of them. If you came here today to hear your question asked, I went through and I read them all. I tried to cover those subjects as best as I could in this dialogue so far, but there are a couple of them that I want to throw up here just for people to hear your comments more directly. Under suffering, both the church and the believer grow. Does this not lend to the instrumentalist view?
Again, I have no problem with God using these things as his instrument, as long as he doesn't send them for that purpose. And given that persecution is a form of sin, how could God have wanted or sent or intended that? But that he uses. And again, particularly where in persecution you have people innocently bearing that which is wrong, and that having a transformative effect, I think that's absolutely what happens.
So I find it interesting in the John 9 story. As he paused, he saw a man blind from birth. Disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Find it interesting, first of all, that they just assumed the blindness was the fruit of sin.
Yep.
And I also find it interesting that while Jesus says it wasn't that this man sinned or his parents, he does not say the blindness is not the fruit of sin.
No.
For certainly the sin of Adam and Eve is at fault, even if no one else's is.
Yep. And again, if you think that God does not will or intend suffering, then you have to see it as the result of creaturely sin of one sort or another.
All right, next question.
But just to emphasize that, one of the ways that one's theology can make things worse for the suffering person is precisely the assumption that if you're going through something, you must have done something wrong. And people sometimes get asked to think through their own lives, think what they may have done wrong. What Jesus says there suggests that that's completely wrong-headed.
If God is against suffering, to prove a point, how do you explain the suffering of Job?
Well, the suffering of Job is a very interesting and important case in point. And the case in point for showing, well, the second, but not quite the first, but the second place to go to prove the point that if you are suffering, it doesn't mean that you've sinned. The blamelessness of Job is laid out time and time and again. It's almost a case point to show that innocent suffering does happen. But the second point about the suffering of Job is, it seems to me that the purpose of the prologue in Job 1 and 2 is precisely to put moral distance between suffering and the person of God. It's to show that it isn't God. The friends of Job and Job himself all assume that it is God who is doing it. We, the reader, are let into the secret that that's not the case. That it is not God who is doing it. It is Satan who is doing it. That seems to me actually to support my case for the fall of the angels being the ultimate cause of all that is wrong, all that is messed up in our world.
What about animal suffering?
Yep.
Thinking about Jesus casting demons into the pigs, does God call us animal suffering?
I want... my I think it's coming out here. I'm sorry.
I've heard a lot of people do a lot of things to avoid answering a question, but the my mic fell off my ear trick is...
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. We'll try. I have very odd-shaped ears, I'm afraid. So there we are. What was the question? Oh, yes.
Yeah, animal suffering.
This is one of the reasons why you can't blame Adam and Eve for everything. Because there's been pain and killing and suffering and death and predation in the world long before human beings appeared on the scene, if there's any truth to modern biology at all. And that's where I think the fall of the angels hypothesis is a really helpful one. It suggests that long before human beings evolved, something has gone wrong. And all I'm suggesting is that so interrelated are the different dimensions of creation, the spiritual, the material, the emotional, and everything else, that what happens in the spiritual dimension impacts upon the physical realm and introduces competition and struggle and conflict and violence. And that animal suffering is therefore not built into creation, however built-in it looks. It is not the will or intention of the Creator. It's because things have gone wrong. It's another symptom of the messed upness that's been brought about by the angelic fall. And human beings are called to put that right insofar as they can. Hence the command in Genesis 1 to fill the earth and subdue it, which suggests there's already, before human beings sin, something that needs to be put right, something that needs to be subdued. And if you want to see what it would have looked like for human beings to have done that, to be faithful to that command and to have subdued creation, look at the person of Jesus. Here at last is a human being doing what human beings were always called to do, stilling the storms, healing the sick, raising the dead, driving out demons, undoing the effects of the angelic fall. So I put animal suffering down.
All right, we are up against the end of this class, and there's so much more
That's
to
what
talk
I was
about.
hoping.
Yeah, so much more to talk about. But I will throw out a fragment of a memory I have in my brain from my 20s, 40 years ago, when I was reading Watchman Nee.
Oh, yes.
Watchman Nee talked about how he believed that Adam and Eve had an ability to invoke God and his power and they had unique abilities that were also lost in the fall.
Well, animals.
That Adam and Eve did.
Adam and Eve did, sorry.
That Adam and Eve, I'm sorry, had
Yes.
unique abilities so that they would have been able to do things very much like Jesus did. They could have taken control of the element. Their job was to be the caretakers of the earth, working it and keeping it. Would you agree with that idea?
I think that subduing the earth, doing the sorts of things that we see in the person of Jesus, is a human calling. And Jesus is able to do them because he's a perfect human being, not primarily because he's divine. Now, as it happens, it took God to live a perfectly human life. But these are human callings. Yeah. And we need, in our way, to do what we can, and the church always has done what it could, to imitate that, to get as close as we can to that. The hospital movement, the hospice movement, the various campaigns against slavery, everything, these are ways of undoing the suffering in the world that's being caused either by human choice, bad choice, or by demonic rebellion.
Okay. Would you join me in thanking Mike for being here today? There are a lot of churches that wanted his attention today, and he came to give us this time, and I'm deeply grateful. Would you, our typical practice at the end of each class is to pronounce a prayer of blessing over the class. Would you all stand, and Mike, would you please do so for us and bless us?
I would love to. And Lord, I am particularly aware that in a group this size, the issues we've been discussing this morning are likely to be not, for some people, not just theoretical, not just theological, but something that they are going through very deeply and very profoundly at the moment. And I want to pray particularly for those people. I want to pray that you'll make yourself known to them as their loving Father and not as the inflictor of whatever it is that they are going through. I want to ask you to be with them, to help them, so to handle what they are going through, that they do so with integrity, but also that they open it up for you to do extraordinary things through them. I ask for everybody here. I thank you for each person. I pray for your rich blessing on each one. I pray for your protection, particularly in this pandemic. We continue to pray for your protection on one another. And I ask that you will take something that has been said today and take it home to the point of need in each person, so that every single person will go away addressed by you, spoken to by you, enriched and enlarged in their understanding, in their confidence in your goodness, and determined to reflect that goodness, that love, that healing commission in their own daily lives. Go with us now, we pray, to your great glory. Amen.